Is two-handed bowling cheating? I don't need to tell you all how much hate two-handed bowling gets and has gotten pretty much since it was first introduced to the world from Oscar Palermo mainly, who was actually the first bowler that we saw make a PBA telecast who was a two-hander, but really it was Jason Belmonte that took that to a whole new level. He simply dominated bowling and changed the game forever. What started as something that was very unorthodox has now turned into the norm, but many people out there still claim that using two hands is cheating. But is that really the case? That's the topic of discussion for today's video. The main issue is that when people claim that it is a form of cheating, they struggle to explain how. They seem to struggle to explain what specific rules are being broken. Now, let's just say it how it is. When two-handed bowling was introduced, it was something that for many, they couldn't quite get their heads around. They hadn't seen anything like this before. Instantly, they were put off. They felt like it just wasn't how the game should be played. For them, bowling was using two fingers and a thumb, although I would argue against that because look at the one-handed no-thumb bowlers. Even if you go back to, the 90s when you had Mike Miller, who was pretty much one of the first pros to not use his thumb. Were people accusing him of cheating? I would say no. I would say that the fanfare would have been a lot quieter for sure. And at the end of the day, the biggest reason that people hate it is because they feel like players that use two hands are gaining a significant advantage. That might be true, but that doesn't mean it's cheating. Using a technique that gives you a significant advantage is just smart. I'm going to give you an example now. Let's look at tennis for a moment. Traditionally, the backhand shot has been used using one hand. Now, of course, pretty much the majority of players will use a two-handed shot for the backhand. Now, that really came about in, I would say, from the 90s onwards, but the two-handed backhand shot does actually date all the way back to the 1930s. But even up to the 80s and early 90s, it was still considered unorthodox. It was not really done by many at all. There was a few standout players that started to use it in the 90s, which is what started to bring more attention to it, and then the popularity of that shot started to increase to the point where you went from having a shot that was very unorthodox to suddenly the majority of players use it. And the reason it became popular is because it does have a lot of advantages. Yes, there are advantages to using one-handed for a backhand shot, but there are a lot of other advantages for using two hands. So the point is that considered cheating? Well, no, of course not. It was just smart. Players found that it gave them more power, control, and consistency. And to be honest, you can say the exact same thing about bowling. Players that have seen, Jason Belmonte use it to success started to try it for themselves. And then they started to realize that, there's lots of advantages. Obviously, it is a lot easier to generate more power and revs using the two-handed style, but I want to talk about a myth here, and that myth is that two-handed bowling is almost like a cheat code, that it's really easy and that anyone can do it. Now, there is some truth to that in the sense of, for beginners, it's a much easier route into the game. It's far easier to throw the ball with two hands down the lane and get your ball to hook than it is with the one-handed style. Trying to hook a bowling ball with one hand does take a lot of time and practice to get it right and also to get it consistent. But using two hands, it suddenly becomes a lot easier. And for the beginner players, that's their goal. They want to see their ball go down the lane and then hook at the end. With a two-handed style, they can achieve that a lot quicker. I've seen that with many players who started off as open players and just messing around, throwing the ball with two hands, and they're just able to get a lot of hook that they wouldn't be able to get with the one-handed style. But the difference between the two styles is that the two-handed style might be easier to learn to begin with, and you might make quicker improvements at the start. But when you actually get further in your progress, it suddenly becomes a lot harder. I always say the one-handed style is harder to learn, but easier to master. And then the two-handed style is easier to learn, but harder to master. I think that statement is very true from what I've seen. You see a lot of two-handed bowlers who are pretty good. It's making that next step to really becoming very good, and then the next step to becoming excellent. And those last two steps for two-handers, that's the hardest part. You know, it's far harder, I think, to become, from a physical point of view, the physical game. I think the two-handed style is a lot harder. If you think it's so easy, go out onto the lanes and give it a try and see whether you can average the same two-handed as one-handed and how long it might take you to get there. It's not as easy as people think. And I think the hardest part about two-handed bowling is the consistency. You do see a lot of two-handers who are wildly inconsistent. And yes, that is a problem for one-handers, of course, as well. But I seem to think two-handers are more susceptible to it, which is because the style is very hard to master and get right time and time again. So bowlers out there that are anti-two-handed bowling will look at it and say, oh, well, it's just a cheat code. It's not proper bowling. It's not real bowling. You know, it's meant to be used with two fingers and a thumb. But at the end of the day, innovation in sports has always been a thing. Players are always looking to gain an edge and an advantage. And it doesn't matter whether it's the most unorthodox thing you've ever seen. If it works, that's all that matters. And it doesn't automatically mean that it's against the rules. I've said this before about Jason Belmonte. He is the best, not because he uses two hands. He's the best because he is so good. Like, it's as simple as that. If he didn't put the work in to his game, if he wasn't extremely dedicated, if he didn't work in the early days on his mental game and his physical game like he did, he wouldn't have been in the position that he is now. It doesn't matter whether you bowl one-handed, two-handed, no thumb. That is irrelevant. What matters is your skill level, your dedication, your commitment, your work ethic, all of these things. That is what makes a bowler good or not so good. It's going to be impossible to convince the traditionalists otherwise, but I do think whatever you say about two-handed bowling, there are pros and cons. And it has done a lot for the game. It has brought people into the game. It's an easier pathway, I think, for people to learn the game. It's created so much interest in the game, and who knows the state that bowling might be in if it wasn't for the two-handed explosion. But like I said, I think the biggest misconception is that people believe that it's some easy cheat code, but that is just not the case at all. Me personally, I've tried it and I'm absolutely awful at it. Yes, I could probably learn, but after trying, I came away and I just thought, do you know what? This is not easy at all. For me personally, I can say that it's definitely way harder than it looks. And even when I did start to sort of get the footwork right and the release a little bit better, I still felt I was wildly inconsistent. So it's not easy at all. It needs a hell of a lot of skill and practice. That is for sure. So is two-handed bowling cheating? Well, my answer is no, absolutely not. It is simply something that was very unorthodox. Something that did give players a lot more power and revs, but it's not cheating. It's just the worst nightmare of traditionalists. And I will just say this as a final point. Just because a player is two-handed, it doesn't mean they're unbeatable or invincible. There are some downsides to two-handed bowling. A big one being that a lot of them really rely on urethane. Now, with the way the game is going, potentially we could be in a world where urethane is not really allowed anymore. It seems to be heading that way. I mean, there's certainly a lot more restrictions obviously being put in place, but a lot of them really do struggle with reactive, which means two things. Firstly, if you're on conditions where urethane isn't the best option, well then I think you've got a very good advantage because, like I say, the two-handed bowlers, the good ones are versatile, but there's a lot out there who only have one or two shots in their game. The other thing as well about two-handers is I think their spare game can let them down. Again, though, I'm talking about sort of your average two-hander. The top two-handers, they have every aspect of their game is at the very top. But the kind of average two-handers that you might come across in leagues or tournaments, sparing does seem to be one of their weak points. Obviously, they normally can make up for their misspares with a lot more strikes, but it's a completely false notion to suggest that two-handed bowlers are way ahead of one-handed bowlers and that one-handers can't compete. At the end of the day, you need to find a way to compete, regardless of the situation. And it's very easy to sit back and say, oh, well, two-handers, they've ruined the game. You know, it's not what it was. But at the end of the day, you have to adapt or die. It's as simple as that. You have to find a way to score and keep up with the field. It doesn't matter whether the field is all one-handed or two-handed, no thumbs, you know, left-handed, right-handed, back up. That is irrelevant. You're bowling in the environment that you're bowling in right now, so you have to find a way to be competitive with the field. And there is always a way to be competitive. I mean, even the great Walter Ray Williams Jr. tried out two-handed bowling and actually even bowled a perfect game using two hands. So you've got a player there who achieved absolutely everything with one hand and then went ahead and switched to two hands. And he's even recently switched to left-handed for a while as well. I mean, that man can pretty much do anything. But as well, it would be very interesting to see if a player like Walter Ray and Norm Duke, how they would fare in today's game. I personally think they were that good at what they did that they would be able to find a way to make it work. And that's the point. You need to find that way to remain competitive in your environment. And the best players are normally able to do so. I'm sure this topic will cause a fair bit of debate, but let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you consider two-handed bowling to be cheating? And if you do, perhaps you could share your thoughts on why. Let me know in the comment section below. And if you have enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of my future videos. Well, that's going to do it from me for today. And as always, thank you, bowling fans, and see you all next time.